Hey guys, welcome to a new video. Today we are going to talk about how to play better in chess openings. Of course, this video is not about stick to the three main principles for the opening. Of course, they are super important, they are essential, you need to know them, but actually I'm assuming you already know the three main principles and other rules. So just to make sure we are fine with them, the three main principles: control the center, develop minor pieces, and castle as soon as possible. And also we need to understand very well other rules like don't bring your queen out early in the opening, like don't move twice the same piece in the opening, develop one piece in every move, or do not play unnecessary pawn moves. These are things we need to understand very well, but they have been said very often. So in this video I want to say, and I want to talk about other things that are still very important and can help you a lot in your chess openings. So without further delay, let's get into my 5 tips to play better in chess openings. So the first thing I want to say is that 3 tempi compensate a pawn down in the opening. In general, as a rule, we can keep this statement in mind and it's going to work pretty well. Also, in some positions, even with 2 tempi but other things, we can have enough compensation. Mainly for gambit players, it's going to be very useful, but also in any opening position, it can happen that our opponent is getting one pawn and then we need to decide whether we need to defend that pawn or we don't need to worry about that pawn because we can get development advantage. I want to work with a line I really like to make my point on this tip. So e4, c5, it's a Sicilian, and then let's say black plays d6 and we can play this delayed alapin, c3. Black plays knight f6, we can play bishop e2. We don't need to defend the pawn because we have a fork here with queen a4. The line can continue knight c6, we can play d4, there might be a trade, knight takes e4, and then we play d5. We continue with the idea of the fork because we want to make the knight move, so we can play queen a4 and get the knight in the center. Black can play here queen a5, we can block, and then there might be a trade, and then knight e5, knight takes knight. In this position we are going to work with 2 lines, with the line of pawn takes knight or with the line queen takes pawn and then queen takes knight. So after pawn takes knight, we can play queen b3, and this is a position I want to analyze for some seconds. Here, when we analyze development, we can see that white needs 2 moves to finish development. They need to castle and they need to play bishop, let's say e3. As black needs like 4 moves. They need 1 move with this bishop, 2 moves for this bishop because they need to move some pawn to be able to develop that piece, and 1 move for the king to castle. So white is 2 tempi ahead in development. So as a general rule, we are going to talk about 3 tempi compensate a pawn, but in some positions, even with 2 tempi, we might have enough compensation, especially if we have other things. For example, in this position, black has other problems, like they cannot develop the bishop so easily because we could be getting b7, or the king is very discovered here, especially over this diagonal, so there might be other things to worry about, like this check on b5 could be a threat. So that's why in this position, only with 2 tempi ahead, there is enough compensation for the pawn down. So as a general rule, 3 tempi compensate a pawn, but in some positions, if we have other things, we could have enough compensation with only 2 tempi ahead in development. The other line after knight takes e5 is going to be queen takes e3. Then we need to block, so we defend the rook, and then black can capture the knight on e5. Here we can castle, black can capture on d5, and then we can just play here rook c1. I just wanted to show you this position because I find it really interesting how white has a lot of compensation here, even when they have like 3 pawns down in this position. So observe, black king is very discovered. White already finished his development, as black still needs like 4 moves. And also we have many open lines. Also we have 2 bishops in an open position and infiltration over c7 and other things, like the queen is very exposed, so at some point we could get tempi by attacking the queen. I just find this position really nice, how we can have like 4 tempi ahead and also have compensation for 3 pawns down. And this is an example from a master's game where we can see this idea of 3 tempi ahead as compensation for a pawn down. So e45, knight f3, knight c6. We have a Scotch game, but then we have this gambit with bishop c4, bishop b4, and then c3. Pawn takes pawn, knight takes pawn. In the game, black plays queen f6, and then white castled. After bishop takes c3, b takes c3. Probably the best move for black here is knight g e7. And then we have this position where white is going to finish development very soon, probably with a tempo because the queen is exposed. And black still needs 1 and 2, and then 3 moves to finish development. So there will be enough compensation in a situation like this for a pawn down. Even when we don't calculate too much, we can affirm almost for sure that there is enough compensation. Actually, the evaluation of this position is white is clearly better. Well, in the game I wanted to show you black actually took the pawn on c3, and now they have 2 pawns. But well, the position is very complicated now because the queen is very exposed and they are not really developing. I mean, they wasted this turn. Of course, they had the idea of attacking the rook and attacking the bishop, but you will see that there are things white can do to get rid of this situation. So white played here queen d5, and the idea is that now they are attacking the pawn on f7. In the game, black plays knight d8, and then we have bishop g5. The idea is to remove the fender so we can capture on f7. In the game, knight e7, and white played here queen c5. At this point, black resigned. There is a good reason for this, and the idea is that white is threatening checkmate on e7, but also there is a very strong threat besides checkmating one, and it is that the queen is on the same line as our queen, so we might have a discovered. So let's assume black plays something like f6, defending against mate. Well, we can play bishop c4 check, bishop f7 check, and after knight takes f7, queen takes c3, and of course white has a huge material advantage. It's a decisive advantage in that position. That's why black resigns at this point. The main idea about this tip, keep in mind, if you have 3 tempi ahead in development in the opening, you should have enough compensation for a pawn down. Well, let's see the next tip, and it is that you need to get ready to break the rules in the opening. In most of the cases, we're going to follow the principles, but sometimes we can break the principles, and that could be the best move in the position. Let's see some examples. So e4, black plays e5, knight f3, knight c6, and then let's say we play d4 after pawn takes pawn. This is a Scotch game. Knight takes pawn, knight takes knight, and then queen takes knight. This is a very basic example. What I want to highlight here is that white is bringing the queen out early in the opening. According to the rules, this should be bad. This should be better for black. However, this position is evaluated like clearly better for white. Why is this? How is white allowing that black brings his queen out and the position is still better for white? Well, the idea here is that after queen takes d4, black does not have a way to get a tempo by attacking that queen. So in this situation, white is breaking the rule, but it's actually fine. Black doesn't have a way to take advantage of the queen. They cannot develop a knight and get a tempo by attacking the queen. Actually, the queen is very powerful in the center. It's controlling many squares. It's actually attacking g7, not letting black develop the bishop. So this is the problem. Even if they try knight f6 to be able to develop the bishop, white is playing e5. So this position is very tricky. It's very complicated, and the queen in the center, instead of a problem for white, is a problem for black. Also, there is another example. Let's assume we are talking about Ponziani opening. Very interesting and tricky and dynamic. In this position, one of the best moves for black is going to be d5. How do we understand this? We said the queen should not go out early in the opening, and here white can play pawn takes pawn, and then queen takes pawn. Well, the idea here is that we don't have the move knight c3 because the pawn is there, so white cannot develop and get a tempo. The queen is actually very well in the center in this position. It's controlling many squares. Black has many ideas like e4 at some point. So this position is totally fine for black after this queen takes d5. I want to show you this example here. Let's assume bishop c4, and then black plays knight f6. In this position, this is a very theoretical position. One of the most popular moves is going to be knight g5. Observe we are moving twice the same piece in the opening. How does this make sense? Well, the idea is that we have a very important threat here. We are taking on f7. Black cannot castle. That's a very typical way to defend against this kind of attacks, and it's very easy to defend when you can castle, but this time they cannot do that. The only move is going to be d5, and then of course we are getting 1 pawn here, and black cannot take because of fried liver attack. Well, what I'm saying is that even when we are moving twice the same piece in the opening, this time is good. This is another example from a master's game. Here it is white to move. A normal move for white in a situation like this could be like e4. You control the center, you are developing your bishop, getting your pawn back on c4. That's the most normal move, I guess. However, white broke the rules here. They found something different and very strong. The best move in this position for white, and the move the master played, was knight d5. It's threatening knight c7, but also some ideas with knight b6 with a fork in both cases. So after knight d5, in this game black played king d8, and then we have bishop d2, threatening bishop a5. After knight d7, there's a check, and then after b6 there's checkmate in 2 moves. White plays here knight c6, and then after king e8, knight c7. The main idea about this example is that in this position at the beginning, instead of playing the normal development move, white was ready to break the rules if necessary, if they can get an advantage, and they found the move knight d5 because of that. This is a super classic example. Reddy was playing as white and Tarakover as black. It was a Caro-Kann in this position after d5, knight c3, pawn takes, and knight takes. Black plays knight f6. At this point, Reddy played the move queen d3. It's moving the queen, it's not developing any piece. How is this a good move? Well, it's actually one of the best moves in the position. The idea is that, well, he's defending the knight, but also he wants to castle queenside. Of course, he needs to develop the bishop first. But because of this idea, white played a super classic game in chess history. Black played e5. That is that they are losing the pawn, but they want to get it back with a fork on a5 in the next move. So black plays queen a5, bishop d2, they get the pawn back, and then Reddy castled at this point. If the queen takes the knight, is hanging, we can play rook e1. However, Tarakover thought, okay, I don't have to capture with the queen, I can capture with the knight, and then here it is white to move, white is winning. I will say it very soon. If you want, of course, you can try to find the combination. Reddy played in this position a queen sacrifice. We are talking about queen d8 check. The idea is to attract the king to this square, because then he will have a double check here with bishop g5. Black has two moves, king c7 or king e8. After king e8, we have mate, opera mate with rook d8, and then after king c7, we have bishop d8 also checkmate. So what I'm saying about this example is that at this point, the move queen d3 is a little strange. It's not very typical for the opponent, but it works pretty well because you're castling queenside in the next move, and also you're defending the knight on e4. Obviously, Reddy was ready to break the rules in this game. And this example is by one of the greatest players of all time. We are talking about Bobby Fischer. In this game, Fischer plays king's pawn, his opponent plays Sicilian, and then we have knight f3, knight c6, d4, pawn takes, knight takes, and then g6. Black is playing accelerated dragon. The game continues, knight c3, bishop g7. This is a main line here, bishop e3, knight f6. They continued the main variation, bishop c4, black castles. Bishop b3 is very normal here, and at this point, black played the move knight a5, trying to get the powerful white bishop on b3. At this point, a normal move for white, I guess, is going to be like castling, finishing development, putting the king safe, maybe f3, controlling the center, but also some ideas, also defending g4. Those are normal moves here. However, Fischer found something different and very strong. Fischer played e5, and the idea is that now the knight is in trouble. There are only two moves for this knight, h5 and then e8. If the knight goes to h5, I guess you can play g4, and the knight is totally lost, trapped on the edge of the board. So that's why Reshevsky played here knight e8. At this point, it is white to move, and Fischer found one of the most beautiful combinations in chess history. I will say it very soon, but you can try to find it feel free to pause the video. It's going to be a really good tactic training, but of course the combination is a little hard. Well, the move Fischer played here is the surprising bishop takes f7. After this move, the idea is that it's removing one of the defenders of the square e6. So there is a pin over here, and that pawn cannot capture a knight if we go there. So for example, after rook takes, you can just play knight e6 and this queen is trapped. We are getting a huge material advantage. In the game, king takes bishop, and now the king is defending, but you know what? It's not really important because the king should not go to the center of the board, so we can just play knight e6 either way. In the game, he takes the knight and Fischer takes the queen, and this is decisive advantage. He won the game some moves later, but actually I want to show you what happens if the king takes. Then you are extracting the king, so you will have checkmate very soon. We can play queen d5 check. After king f5, we can play g4, opening lines. We continue extracting black king and also keeping the initiative and the turn to play. After king takes g4, we can play rook u1. After king h4, you can give a check, and then you can give a check with your queen. Even when black blocks, you take. This is going to be checkmate. The main idea here is that at this point, instead of developing or playing a normal move controlling the center, Fischer played e5. He broke the rules, but he found a fantastic combination. And finally, one last example about this tip of breaking the rules. A normal move for white here is something like g3, where you're developing and you're preparing to castle very soon. Instead of that, the master, as white, found something. He could take the initiative, he could threaten things and create some problems. So he found this idea of playing d5, and he could be playing d6 in the next move. And this is going to be really strong and really dangerous. So, you know, he had open mind, he was ready to break the rules and play this idea. So white played d5, and this was just getting a very important advantage, decisive advantage for white. After knight e5, he played d6. The bishop had to go back to f8, and at this point he found knight b5. This is just winning the game because he's playing knight c7 in the next, and probably black will need to sacrifice the queen. So in all the lines, black is losing a lot of material here. So, you know, the main idea about this tip is stick to the principles, but get ready to break the rules. Of course, this is not so easy, but as you get the experience, as you see examples like these ones we have analyzed here, it is going to be much simpler. Let's go with tip number 3, and it is going to be develop with tempo if possible. So we're not talking about only about developing our pieces. We're also talking about try to develop with tempi. So this looks like a very simple tip, but we can complicate it as much as we want. Let's start with a basic example, and then we will see something more complicated. So for example, if 4 d5, and if we capture here, it takes d5, queen takes d5, we can play knight c3, and here we are developing and getting a tempo. That's good for white. That's something like what we want. For example, if black plays here queen c5, we can play d4, we develop, we control the center, but also we get a tempo. If black plays here queen f5, we can play bishop d3, and then we develop and we get a tempo. So that's something we should try to prioritize. If you can develop and get tempo in the opening, it should be much better. This example is a little more complicated, but also much more interesting. It is white to move. Pause the video if you want. Try to find the best move for white. I will explain it very soon. So the best move for white here is going to be a development move where we can get a tempo. Of course, this is not so easy to find because it's a tactic move. So the right move for white here is going to be bishop g5. And you're attacking the queen, but the bishop is hanging. So the main question here is, well, what happens if queen takes bishop? Also, the queen doesn't have too many squares, but probably queen b4 is another move here. Well, after queen b4, we have many moves, but probably queen f3 is very good because you're taking b7. You're also attacking here on f7. Even if black plays f6, you could be winning with this check. And after g6, knight takes pawn. And after pawn takes, queen takes pawn. This is checkmate. So queen b4 doesn't solve all the problems for black in this position. So bishop g5, the main question is, well, what happens after queen takes bishop? Well, this time we have an attraction. We can play here the move rook d8. The idea is that we want to attract the king here, so we can do a fork. After king takes rook, knight takes f7, king e8, knight takes queen, and of course, this is decisive advantage for white. As you can see, this example is much more complicated, but if you keep in mind this idea of trying to develop and get a tempo at the same time, it's going to be much simpler to find things like this in our games. Well, the next tip I want to say is do not trade pieces if it helps your opponent develop or improve his position. So let's see this example in Queen's Gambit, d4, d5, c4, e6, and after knight c3, knight f6, bishop g5, bishop e7, e3. In this position, usually we are going to avoid to capture here on c4. This is a very basic example, but also we can complicate this a little more and learn things from this tip. Like, we don't trade here because of course we're developing white bishop. So usually if you want to trade on c4 for some reason, black is going to wait for white to develop and only then capture there on c4. Let me show you an example. Let's assume we castle in this position as black and white develops, and then we trade, and then bishop takes. As you can see, black is already castled at this point. In the other line, instead of castling, let's see the line where black takes here. Observe that after bishop takes c4, black king is still in the center. So it's exactly the same position, but we haven't castled. So we have a tempo down here. So that's an example about do not trade if you're helping your opponent develop. But also there's another situation here. So let's say we castle as white plays knight f3, and then let's say c6. In general, in this kind of positions, white is not going to rush with this trade on d5, and there are good reasons to not rush with this. If we trade, black can, for example, take with the pawn, and then they could be able to develop that bishop. So you are going to improve black's pieces. In these positions, black has problems with the development of the bishop, and also sometimes the knight is colliding with the bishop, and it's like very annoying for them how to develop pieces. So we don't need to rush with this trade as we are helping black improve his pieces. Also, in some positions they don't capture with the pawn for some reason. They can also capture with the not with the e pawn, they can capture with the c pawn, and this is also going to help black develop the knight over c6 because this is a square that is not available right now, and after the trade is a good option for black. Finally, tip number 5, hinder your opponent from developing. So we are talking about developing our pieces, but also about making it harder for our opponent to finish or continue his development. So I have an example by Aliashin, world champion number 4. So let's say e4 e6, d4 d5, French defense, knight c3, bishop b4 with our variation, bishop d3, bishop takes c3, b takes, and then a6. In this game, Aliashin played the move bishop a3. Observe that the bishop is controlling f8. It's not only developing, but also making it harder for black to finish his development, as they won't be able to castle so easily. In the game, knight e7, queen e2, d takes e4, bishop takes e4, and knight g to f6. The bishop goes back, and the pawn goes to b6. This is actually a blunder. It's a huge mistake in this game. Actually, the position after this move, white is winning, but actually the position is still very playable for black if they play here c5, interfering the bishop so they can castle. There's nothing wrong for black in this position. In the game, black plays b6. Now it is white to move, and white is winning. I will say it very soon. In this position, Aliashin had checkmate in 2 moves. He can play queen sacrifice on e6, queen takes pawn. If the queen blocks, we can take it, checkmate, and if the pawn takes, bishop g6. This is a nice checkmate with 2 bishops over here. And finally, another example about the same idea, e4, e6 is a French again, d4, d5, knight c3, pawn takes, knight takes pawn, bishop d6, bishop d3, knight goes to e7, and then at this point, white is playing the move bishop g5. And this is not only developing the bishop, but also hindering black from castling. Of course, this example is much more complicated because it's not clear how is bishop g5 preventing black from castling. Well, we're gonna see it very soon because actually in the game black castled and now it is white to move and white is winning, but as I said, it's a tough combination. In the game the master plays knight f6. It's a nice sacrifice, but the whole point is that there will be two bishops and also a queen attacking a discovered king without protection. So for example, after pawn takes knight, as it happened in the game, white can play bishop takes pawn. The threat now is queen g4, and then it's almost made. Maybe they can block, but they could be losing the queen at least. In the game, black plays queen d7. The idea is to be able to block with the knight and not lose the queen. However, it's just too late. It is white to move, and white is winning with a tactic combination checkmate in 3 moves in this position. The master as white played bishop takes h7, after king takes h7, queen h5, and then after king g8 we have queen h8 checkmate. So the main moment we need to highlight here is this position where white did not play knight f3 or did not play bishop d2. Instead of that, they put the bishop on g5 because if the king, if black castles here, there is a combination starting with knight f6. So, for your own games, not only develop, but also keep in mind if you can develop and hinder your opponent from development moves. If you guys have any question, let me know in the comments. If you want to see tips for the mid game or the end game, check out these interesting videos over here. I'm sure you will enjoy them and they will help you a lot. Thank you so much guys. Like, subscribe, see you on the next.